Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Pond Hunter broadcast from the Under the Sea radio show on Blog Talk Radio. The Pond Hunter, in the pursuit of all things aquatic. Take a look into the world of koi ponds, water gardens, and the lifestyles of the aquatically obsessed. Meet the pros, hobbyists, and cover some no-nonsense pond advice straight from the field. The Pond Hunter, in the pursuit of all things aquatic. Here's your host, koi pond and water garden expert, Mike Gannon.
Hey, everybody. That's right, all things aquatic. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Pond Hunter radio broadcast for episode 44. I'm your host, Mike Gannon, and I have a great guest for this show, world-renowned pond builder, a sculptor of rock and water with more than 2,000 projects spread out over many different countries. He's also the author of several pond and water garden books and host of Animal Planet's original TV show, The Pool Masters. He is truly one of my pond heroes, and I'm very excited to have Mr. Anthony Archer Wills with me on the phone. Anthony, are you on the line?
Mike, it's a pleasure to be on your show. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for taking the time. Happy New Year. And how are you doing today?
Very well, yes. I'm looking out on a snowy scene, and the sun is shining. It's beautiful. A far cry, actually, from the limpid depths of water gardens.
Yes. But still, the beauty of nature all the same is something wonderful to enjoy. We got a little bit of snow in my area as well, and it really is shaping up to be a beautiful day. And I just want to say thanks again for being here. And clearly, you're a pioneer in the world of modern and contemporary pond design. You've been at it for a couple of years now. And to me, being a pond builder is something of it's a curious occupation and livelihood to make. And I'm always fascinated with how pond professionals come into this type of work. How did pond building and design start for you?
Well, really by default, actually, because my interest was more in chemistry and physics and engineering and all sorts of mechanical things. But I think I had a certain attention deficit, and that failed. And I loved water, and I really got into water gardening by default. The reason I think for this was really at my formative age of about 4, 5, 6 to 8. I was introduced to water in rather extraordinary ways because when I was a child, I was taken to big country houses where there were what they called lily tanks, where people grew water lilies, and typically these were a formal design, either circular or rectangular, and they were really designed to display water lilies in the country houses because one has to remember that before the end of the 19th century, very few people built ponds because there was not much available to put into them. And then the French hybridizer Marliac produced all these wonderful new water lily hybrids at the end of the 19th century, and people began to get really excited, and a craze started in building ponds that one could display these in. And so I became fascinated by this, and I think that might have been a formative point, coupled with the fact that I was taken to see big country houses that had their own sewage plants, and I was fascinated to see how the sewage water from these large estates was purified, going through reed beds and different filter systems of clinker, and came out pure at the other end. So this, I think, had an effect on me.
Yeah, that's amazing. how they would do that. I mean, essentially using wetland technology to purify their water right there on the estates. That's what it sounds like they were pretty much doing at that time.
You're absolutely right. And so nothing is really new. It's all old technology, and they were allowing nature to do its job and purify the water, because that's what nature does. If anything horrible gets into a pond or lake, there's all the bacteria in the plants to clean it up, and it soon purifies itself. And then another curious thing happened, because I was sent away to boarding school at the age of 8, and they wisely or unwisely allowed us to pretty much do what we liked in the Sundays, in the afternoons, and we had streams and springs and ponds in the woods, and we could mess about in the mud and build dams, and there was also a very interesting Roman bath there with a spring and water coming out of the back of these sort of caves into a beautiful, what must have been a swimming pool in bygone days. It was a lovely sort of formal basin, rather crumbling at the edges, and this was full of interesting plants and creatures, and I would stare into the depths and see that basically one had a complete world underwater, a complete ecosystem where one had life and death and decay and rebirth, and this was, a fascination for me.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. So that Roman bath was still somewhat functional apart from the degradation around the edges. It sounds like it was still holding water.
It was still holding water, and it was overgrown and sort of forgotten pretty much out in the woods. But it was a wonderful feature. I loved it, sort of decayed feeling. So, I think that kind of shaped my my imagination and love for water, and both formal and naturalistic features. I think one point which is of interest is very few naturalistic or free-form shape pools were actually constructed until, really recent times, probably around the last World War. After that, people started to build much more what we would call modern and imaginative informal shapes. And as I fell into, as I say, this by default, because I was at a loose end, and I decided to build a pond, and then I built another small pond. They were hideous concrete structures, which I would have been utterly ashamed of these days, but this was how people built them. They were typically concrete or brick-lined, and then had some sort of coping round them in stone or brick. Right. And to try and disguise the concrete edges, which never really worked very well. So that's pretty much how I started. And then somebody saw the pond and said, "Would you build one for me?" And being sort of rather, as I say, at a loose end, I said, "Yes, sure, I'll do anything for a good lunch."
Now, how old were you at that time when somebody actually asked you to build for them? You weren't just building for yourself.
No, I was actually working on a tug, ocean-going tugs, because I said I had an interest in engineering, but this wasn't working out too well at all. So between times and between trips, I would have been 17 at the time. I built my first half-hearted pond at the age of, at the very, I would say early 17, about 64, 1963, 64. So, I've been doing it since then, which is over 50 years. It seems unbelievable.
I'm sure the time has flown. I'm sure too that you've seen that. You'd mentioned you had an interest in chemistry, physics, and engineering. The pond building occupation really oftentimes is going to require you to practice a little bit of chemistry, certainly some engineering, and a little bit of physics even from time to time. So
yes,
at least you didn't have to fully give those up.
No, absolutely not. They were helpful. It was a very useful adjunct to my work, especially, the pumping system, pipe frictions. I love machines. I love pumps, all those sort of things. And I, of course, had an aquarium, and that was another learning curve because that had an under-gravel filter. And it was all planted up, and one learned very quickly that a well-planted aquarium had clear water.
Yes.
And worked like the ponds. It was all about the planting. And so the whole system of the water chemistry really became part of the equation in getting good water. But what I think was interesting was I grew water plants. I was fascinated by aquatic plants, and I started what I called my water plant nursery. Again, it was a very small amateurish affair to begin with. But this actually grew and blossomed until in England I had a staff of 15, and we would have 3 teams out at once building ponds, and it actually became quite a productive and an efficient system at one point or another.
That's amazing. And so this is in, say, the late 60s, would that be correct in saying that, when you had
late 60s, early 60s, early 70s?
Okay.
A very important revelation occurred to me because I was struggling. It was very difficult to make these ponds look naturalistic, using the old techniques of putting a concrete or early type of liner pond in and then trying to hide it and disguise it by balancing slabs of stone and rocks around the edge that you could always see underneath and see this telltale rim which said straight away, this is artificial, this isn't natural. And also, one went to a lot of length, a lot of trouble to try and form an attractive shape, and then get the rocks to conform to this shape. And that was very time-consuming and it didn't work very well at all. One day I was lying in my bath, which is, it rather smacks of Archimedes, I know, but I do find that it stimulates the brain. And I thought, what are you doing? You're losing money with this. It's taking so long to do, and it's not really very effective. What are we trying to do? We're trying to make a pool that holds water and will hold water hopefully in excess of 100 years, and yet look as though nature had created it. So what we need to do is to create a waterproof bag into which everything else goes. And this was a revelation to me, because instead of agonizing over the shape and trying to get rocks to conform to the shape, I made a very simple form, very simple water shape, and then I would put all the rock work, promontories, outcroppings, beaches, whatever it was involved, inside the liner. The liner became unimportant except as a watertight vessel to hold everything else. And so one had, it was wonderful. One had complete free hand to place the rock as it wanted to go. It would tell one, this rock needs to go here and this one needs to go next to it, and so forth. One had a complete free hand to have artistic license with this method. And so I began to teach for the Agricultural Training Board new methods of construction. And that was an interesting exercise.
Yeah, especially given the long history of the use of concrete to create water features. And you really have been credited being among the first to use a butyl rubber type of liner for ponds. Now, where did you find that material? Because you had to have taken that material from another industry. Was it like a roofing liner? How did you come across this material at that time?
It was interesting because it was actually used in the reservoir industry. It had been originally developed during the war, as I understand, or about that time, for undersea cables. Butyl was used for waterproofing transatlantic cables, also for making bulletproof fuel tanks for the fighter planes because its elastic qualities. It was used as a lining in the tanks, apparently. And so I was involved with a company called Gordon Lowe, and they were the first people to discover a way of actually welding it together, which had been very difficult. You have to use heat and pressure and things. And so they had a press, and I was asked to help construct a reservoir. And I thought, this is wonderful. Gosh, we can use this in my ponds. So for years, I used butyl, and then we found that EPDM was actually more cost-effective and pretty much as good. So particularly in the United States, we use EPDM now. And I think EPDM is becoming much more widely used in Europe. There are, of course, many other materials that one can use as well. But the thing about the EPDM and the butyl is their elastic quality, 300 to 400% elasticity before breaking point, which allows them to, conform around anything, rock or any sharp place before actually breaking.
Yeah, you never want to put it to the test.
We actually have tested, to destruction on occasions to make sure, everything was right, hunky-dory. We would do a weld or a join, then attach it to a vehicle and pull it apart and see what broke. And invariably, the original sheet would break rather than the weld. So we would test it out.
That's great. So no problems with seaming.
No, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I've never built a concrete pond. I've been building really with only EPDM. I've ripped out a few concrete ponds, but never used that as a material. So I think it's really a very smart choice for the construction of many, many types of water features. Your garden center, just to touch back on that for a moment, because I think a lot of people these days, when they think garden center, they're thinking of Home Depot. It conjures up images like that. Can you kind of tell me about how your garden center was set up at that time?
Well, yes, love to. It was really an aquatic center rather than a garden center. We only grew aquatic, moisture-loving, and emergent plants and associated trees and shrubs at the nursery. And we had these polythene tunnels, plastic tunnels and shade tunnels. And it gradually grew and expanded over the years until it was, a lot of fun. It would give me immense pleasure to walk amongst the beds of plants and see how they were growing. And it's such a wonderful experience to actually grow plants from scratch, and whether it's from seed or cuttings or divisions, and to see them all beautifully laid out in rows and growing, and then, to have delighted customers coming round and picking out the plants they want and going out with armfuls of plants. It's immensely rewarding.
Yeah, and I hope I hope people don't let that get away. It worries me with the Home Depots and Lowe's and those type of operations where people aren't going to realize the magic of a beautiful aquatic center or garden center, and how it's worth driving an hour or two to get to some of these places. Whereas, these days, so many people are about convenience, and I hope that magic never goes away. I hope people keep that tradition alive.
I think, that's interesting, but I think the magic is in the plants and choosing them. And, even going around Lowe's or Home Depot and seeing all these wonderful plants, that's very exciting as well. And you can choose some wonderful things from these big depots. So there's magic in that. They don't actually grow them themselves.
Right.
The growers do that, but there's still often a wonderful collection. So I don't think one should knock them, because they also have an important part to play in stimulating people into growing things. And I think if the plants were not readily available to the public, people probably wouldn't bother. They see something and they think, oh, isn't that wonderful? I must take that home and grow it. I actually call that in my lectures suffering from the garden center syndrome, where people actually don't plan a garden, but they see something they love and think, oh, I must take that home, and this keeps happening, and we've got to try and find a place to plant that now. And people will bring well-wishers and gifts. They'll bring plants to people, and in the end the garden becomes really quite cluttered up with a whole collection of plants rather than actually following a design. And I think that can lead to a mistake. I remember my mother's garden had an immense collection of plants, but absolutely no bones or shape to it. So in the winter, it really it hadn't got a good skeleton. And I think you need to have a very good, strong structure in a garden, so that even if the things aren't in flower or they've died down for the winter, the shapes and forms and structure of the garden still shows up nicely,
Yeah. And it's I find it very interesting that your garden center was busy with crews out there installing ponds. I love that. I think that's wonderful. It seems like there was a lot of kind of pond-related activity happening over in England in the late 60s, early 70s. From what you're describing, I know that the koi industry was kind of kicking off, at least in that area, was blossoming at that time too. I found that very interesting that all that was coming out of England at the time.
Yes, I think there was, of course, the English have always been a nation of gardeners, haven't they? And a lot of the people who started wonderful aquatic nurseries, like Waterfords in this country, were Englishmen who came over, or English people. But I think one thing that was interesting was how things started more from a sort of functional angle, and the aesthetics came later. I remember the first really formative pond that I made was really crucial, I think, to my modern work, was being asked in the late 60s to build a trout lake. And this was beautiful. It was not huge. It was about an acre and a half, this one. And the customer said to me, I want gin-clear water for these trout. And I thought, well, we're going to have to build this rather like one would an aquarium or koi pond. It's got to be filtered water. Yes. And so I built a big gravel filter, a huge under-gravel filter, and had a waterfall from the filter into the big trout pond. And, of course, they called it a lake. because any stretch of water more than 100 feet across is called a lake in England.
Okay.
So it was, they glorify even the smallest stretch of water, whilst in this country we have to have miles of water before it becomes a lake.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing. Anyway, this was very successful, and people, were amazed how clear this was. And
Yeah.
I think this was probably a forerunner of the swimming pond. I build a lot of those now, and of course they've been accepted in Germany initially. Swimming pools using plants instead of chemicals.
Right.
And now in this country, we have the first public one in Minnesota. So it's just the same technology as the old undergravel aquarium filter, or what people are doing for koi ponds.
Yeah. It's amazing how versatile that very simple concept of filtration really can be, and how it can be scaled from the smallest of aquariums up to what you're saying, lakes and even beyond. So you're at your garden center. It's a busy place, but at some point you started branching off internationally and doing projects in other parts of the world. How did that end up coming about?
That's a very interesting question, one which I really not thought about too much. I think it was a recommendation. My first overseas project was in the south of France, when somebody called me up out of the blue and said, "Would you come and build us a cascade?" And I thought, I don't know if I like the sound of cascade. It sounds rather boring and formal. But of course, it's the French word for waterfall, cascade.
Yes.
And I hadn't quite put two and two together. And he said, "Look, please come over. We'll pay your expenses, etc." And he said, "You can see if you like the project. And if you do, it'll be wonderful. We can move forward. If not, we'll shake hands and say, well, very good to meet you. Goodbye." And so on that basis, I flew to the south of France. The project was amazing. It was wonderful. They were the most charming, marvelous people. And that led to another project in France, and then others, and word of mouth. And I think possibly at that time I'd written my first book, which was really internationally accepted and translated into French and Dutch and many, many languages.
Several languages,
and
yes.
Then people started to call me up and say, "Anthony, would you come and do something for us?" So this was immensely rewarding, although I have to be truthful, it was slightly to the expense of the work at home, because I wasn't able to take quite so much personal involvement in it.
Right. Interesting, though. So some of the work was coming from your books. Now, of course, word of mouth is always the best way to get introduced to anybody for procuring new work, because it certainly wasn't the internet back in those days. So you started writing books. What was? I'm always curious about that as well. What was the process for you? Did you sit down and write a book, or was it piecemeal? Did you have essays and stuff that you compiled over a period of time? And what made you want to write a book?
I'll tell you why exactly. I had been giving lectures and teaching for the Agricultural Training Board and an organization called BALI, which was the British Association of Landscape Industries. And I realized that a lot of information was being passed to people. And far from them using my ideas and putting me out of business, it actually brought a lot more business in. And people would call up and say, Anthony, this looks more complicated than we sort of want to get involved in. And these were big landscape companies. Would you come and help us or advise and, all that good stuff? And I said to my colleague, I've worked for a lot of landscape people like John Brooks. And I said, John, I really should write a book and get all this down. I'm giving all these people these ideas and, I should really get them down. And he said, well, yes, you really ought to. Or he said, I'll write the book. Get on with it, he said. Get on with it. So it was John, actually, who catapulted me into this job, which is actually an onerous task. I have to say, if anyone has written a book, they will know it's not easy. It's a lot of hard work. And I just had to slog at it. I had three big hits at it. One when I was in Florida working on studying the subtropical water plants. And then one when I was actually in, where was I now? Let me think. Somewhere in the Mediterranean. I think it was in Cyprus. And I was able to have a calm mind. You have to have a calm mind. The rest was very early in the morning in England before the people came in to work at the nursery and get going on the project. So I would be up in the summer at 5 a.m. writing for a couple of hours or so before the work started. It was tough for me because I'm not a morning person. If left to my devices, I would sleep till 12. So it was really a hard slog to get this book done.
Right. My gosh. Well, I can say for sure, I have 3 of your books. I'm not sure if there's any that I'm missing, but the information in those still is completely relevant to this very day. I mean, there's really, when you go through and you think of how times have changed so much over the last, just say 20 years, but the information in those books are still so completely relevant. They're really quite a punch of information in all of those for anybody, whether you're a professional or even just a hobbyist. They're truly, I feel they're treasures. I'm very happy with. I'm looking over at my bookshelf right now. They're right there, but they really are completely relevant to this very day.
I appreciate you saying that. I think the principles are going to hold good. Techniques improve, but these were fundamental ideas which I laid down, and the books were used in colleges, in all the landscape courses. Because, it's a system which is very simple, and often the simplest things are the best.
Sure. Yeah. And even a lot of problem solving. You do a lot of troubleshooting, and, pond builders can get themselves into trouble out there in the field sometimes. And you even suggest ways to get machinery unstuck. I mean, there's some good stuff that people can certainly.
Right. You always think, I've pretty much seen it all, and then something else comes to bite you, and think, oh my word, how do we deal with this? So problems are put there to be solved, aren't they? And one really enjoys the challenge.
Absolutely. Yes. But it's good to have those books on hand. If I ever have a problem, go grab the book.
I had a wonderful, sorry, I beg your pardon, carry on.
Oh, no problem. You'd mentioned in some of your projects, now you're building waterfalls in France, but your projects have evolved over the years, and you've done so many. They include everything from deep pools, long streams, caves, and grottos. Many of your projects have rocks that weigh many, many tons. What would you say is maybe your favorite project, or a project that particularly stands out to you?
Several interesting points you bring up there. I think the projects become favorite with the people rather than the actual production. And I think if people are wonderful, then you love the project. And that makes or mars a job. I think it's all to do with the people. So some of my favorite ones have been with the loveliest people, I have to say that. But I also like to do the things that I would have always wanted as a child. I love caves. I love secret passages. I've always wanted to be able to get behind a waterfall and be behind the curtain of falling water. And so I try to design things which I would have always loved myself, and hence the use of big rocks, because I always think a few big rocks are much more convincing than lots of little ones. For example, if you need to build a rock wall, a retaining wall, let's say 6 feet or 2 meters high, 20 feet, long, you could do that with lots of pieces weighing a few hundred pounds, and it would take maybe a week or more to build. Or I could do it with 3 big rocks, which could be put in a morning. And the 3 big rocks, I can guarantee, will look as though they've always been there. And it's part of a natural rock escarpment, an outcropping. So much more naturalistic and convincing than what would typically perhaps look like a stone wall.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. So you enjoy creating a bit of mystery in your designs, it sounds like, with these caves and grottos, and the big stone creates that visual impact, and as you mentioned, makes it look like it has been there, placed there by nature.
Absolutely.
That's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I would agree with you. Some of my favorite projects really have to deal exactly with the client and my interactions with them, and even their responses to a project. Some of I guess we all have our problems out in the field too. I guess some of the biggest disasters usually are client related too. Have you ever had a project that just really went the other direction from what you were planning? Have you had any disasters?
Yes, 1 or 2 that have croaked or gone belly up. I've had, in my career, and I must have had, 2,500 clients or more. I can honestly say the bad ones I can list on one hand. 3, 4 fingers. Very few difficult people, but 1 or 2 were really a problem. And one turned me gray, literally, within a couple of months. I hate dishonesty, and I hate people trying to be clever at one's expense and unjust. And it's awful if you get a client that swears that black is white, or that you've never had that particular conversation when you've actually done it and agreed it. So that's few and far between, and I really don't dwell on them, because that's only self-destructive. I always try and think of the positive.
Exactly. What we can offer to people, I really truly believe that the occupation, how we make our livelihood in designing and building ponds, is such a gift to people that I agree with you. You just move on. If there's somebody who can't experience it and enjoy what we have to offer, then you move forward and you move to the next customer, and you try to create happiness and appreciation with them.
I'm so glad you said that. I love that attitude. And to me, it raises the quality of life for people. It gives them fun, pleasure, drama, excitement, and a wonderful feeling of repose and tranquility in their own home, in their own property, which without the water and the experience of the plants and nature and the rocks, they would be really bereft of this wonderful therapy.
Yes, and they could be 2 years old or they could be 92 years old, and the appeal is still there. There's something magical about water. And when I look at designs and water features, I kind of look at a lot of them as having three basic elements, which would be the pool area, the stream, and the waterfall. When you're doing design, which one of those elements, if you were to pick of those three, gives you the most pleasure?
Well, gosh, another difficult question. you are really.
I've been up all
touching,
night thinking of hard things to ask you.
you touch nerves, don't you? Gosh, well, I would say the waterfall and the pool are pretty equal. The waterfall has the wonderful drama, this amazing tension where you have water fighting with rock, and the rock is sending the water in all these different complex directions. So replicating that is a marvelous challenge and a very exciting experience, and can be beautiful if you have the right rock and you have the client who's happy to give you a free hand and let you go ahead. But the pool has such magic in its placid surface and its underwater depths and all its creatures and life and sparkle and reflections, and the wonderful water lilies and lotus that you can grow in it. So I think both, I love it all. That's the problem. I love it all. I never get blasé about any project, however large or small. I just really get right into them, and I enjoy the process. I love working with people and meeting people and creating something that's a real pleasure for them.
Yeah. And that's probably what has brought you to the point after, so many years of doing it, that it only would seem appropriate that you would end up with a TV show to help share this vision to an even broader audience. It's such a personal thing when you're working with people directly to create these water features, but now you have the opportunity on television on Animal Planet's The Pool Master, which is one of their hit TV shows. You're the host of that. How did that all come about?
Well, it was actually an interview. They were looking for somebody, and I think they'd heard about my work. They must have done, because I've had the honor of working for dukes and earls and music personalities, pop personalities, musicians, Shakespearean actor such as Lord Olivier. I think they thought, this guy sounds interesting. Maybe we should give him a shot. And apparently they interviewed over 100 people, and they thought, well, maybe he's okay. I don't know. I have a very poor opinion of myself, but they thought maybe he's the right guy for the job.
Okay. Well, I think they were correct. You are the right guy for the job. I've seen all the shows, of course. I really truly enjoyed it quite a bit. I will confess to you that I wish you were called the Pond Master, but I'm okay with the Pool Master too, because it kind of touches on all these different elements. Do you have a favorite episode that you did? And also I got to think, people watch these TV shows and think, it's got to be so fun. There's got to be some difficulties and challenges in creating these TV shows as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was all a huge challenge. The time factor was the biggest problem. Time factor, budget, other activities, because we were taken away to shoot other scenes, B-roll, and so the actual amount of time able to be located to the project was slimmed down to about 2 weeks, often under 2 weeks, which is difficult to actually create an elaborate and complex project in that time, when normally one would spend 4 to 6 weeks on a similar project. So that was very, very challenging for everybody, and I have the greatest admiration for the team. They were wonderful, all those people working on it, and the hard work, often working till well after midnight and starting again at 4 or 5 in the morning. We had a tremendous workload to get through all that. And they were younger than me and worked furiously to get it all done. So yes, hugely challenging. They were all fun in their own way, and the people were lovely, and we had a great time, I must admit, with all the different projects. Some of them were really beautiful. The Japanese garden was a lot of fun, and I think turned out really beautifully. One of the amusing thing was all these pools were built and filled, often filled minutes before we had to test them out. So the water was frigid. And on many of these scenes, I had to get into frightfully cold water. And the initial one of the initial shows had me diving into this pool in Hollywood, which had just been filled, and I'm sure the water was no more than about 45, 50 degrees, and I was in there for half an hour doing all these things, swimming over glass panels and going down water slides and chutes. And they promised me a hot shower at the end of it, and I would hope. Really looking forward to this. And then, they said, "Oh, so sorry, though all the water's been turned off." So that was that was a tough episode.
Well, at least they didn't forget to plug in the camera, and they didn't have to do it again.
Oh, right. No. But wonderful crews, wonderful people. And, again, hats off to all the contractors who worked so hard on all that.
Absolutely. As someone who builds, I watch these shows, and I guess it's just built into me that I'm thinking about the logistics of your projects as I'm watching the show unfold. And you see the time frames presented by way of the prism of television, which isn't exactly reality. And I know, as you had said, these guys must have been working till, as you mentioned, midnight and beyond. I mean, it's amazing what they pulled off. You really did put together amazing contractors and a crew to work with, and just made it look effortless, and just made these absolutely beautiful projects. And I'm so glad that it's out there, because I really feel that the pond and water feature genre is underserved in the TV industry. There's got to be 20 shows that show guys eating hamburgers, 50 shows with guys putting up sheetrock and renovating houses, and there's maybe 2 to 3 shows for water features, which are the jewels of any landscape. It's definitely an underserved genre that I hope grows. I really do. Because I think people are dedicated.
Yeah, they love working in this genre, and I always say one's only as good as one's team. And when I had 3 crews working on pond construction, I was full of admiration for them. If you got a good crew, they would do a wonderful job. If it was a poor crew, it wouldn't. So I love people, and keeping them happy. I always believe, in the carrot rather than the stick.
Right. Yeah. Well, I hope there's a big future for ponds and water gardens on TV. I've seen enough guys hanging sheetrock and painting it. I can't take it anymore. So what is the future for the pool master?
Well, I mean, I've no intention of retiring, no plans at all. I don't think I ever could. And I remember listening to a television program featuring Sir Geoffrey Jellicoe, who was 80 at the time, and he said, I thought I'd be retiring at 80, and he said, I'm actually busier than ever. He was a landscape architect. And so I think probably I'll go on maybe until I drop.
Please don't retire. We need you, Anthony. We need you in this. And I just want to thank you so much for taking the time and coming on here and sharing your expertise, your background, everything with us. You're truly an inspiration for me, and I know a whole generation of pond builders. So thank you so much for taking your time to join me on the Pond Hunter Radio broadcast. And I'll always be following your adventures, and look forward to seeing you again someday. I always like to tell the story. The first time I was able to see you speak was up in, it was I can't remember the place. It was at a garden club in Massachusetts. I think it was Worcester, and it was the night of a blizzard. And I live in New Jersey.
Oh,
I said
my
to my wife,
word.
I said, oh my gosh, Anthony Archer Wills is going to be speaking. So we hopped in the car and we drove 5 hours through a blizzard. And it was just a pleasure it was an adventure for us. And it was a great time to see you speak and meet you. And I ran into you a few weeks ago, and I hope I get to see you and spend some time with you again.
Well, Mike, me too. And it was absolutely wonderful talking with you. Thank you so much. And I hope you're able to do a lot of beautiful ponds this season, because
I intend to.
You obviously enjoy it as much as I do.
Very much. It's my life. It's what I do. So, and thank you for the inspiration.
Not at all. Thank you so much.
Cheers, and have a wonderful 2017. I look forward to seeing you again, Anthony.
Mike, thanks, and the same to you. Thanks so much. Bye now.
Okay. Bye-bye. Take good care. That was the extraordinary Anthony Archer Wills, everybody, the author of The Water Gardener, Water Power, and Designing Water Features. And his books can still be found on Amazon.com. They're out there. Go ahead and get them. They're a wonderful resource for anybody, whether you're a hobbyist or a professional or just interested in seeing beautiful projects and beautiful pictures. And of course, he is host of Animal Planet's The Pool Master. His TV show can be found on Animal Planet and, of course, on YouTube. He's also involved with teaching with the Genesis 3, which is a program designing with water. And promoting BioNova naturally filtered swimming pools, which he had mentioned a little bit earlier. His website is archerwills.com if you would like to contact him. And thank you again, Anthony, for coming onto the podcast. I appreciate it very much. My name is Mike Gannon, everybody. My company is Full Service Aquatics, based out of Summit, New Jersey. We design, install, and service amazing water gardens, ponds, koi ponds, and water features of every type. If you're interested in a project, please reach out. I'm easy to find. My website is fullserviceaquatics.com, and you can catch me on Facebook. And there's plenty more Pond Hunter on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, Pinterest, and Instagram. And the podcast now can also be found on YouTube. And as always, iTunes and Blog Talk Radio. Thanks, everybody. Take good care. Be good to each other. And share this pond keeping lifestyle with everyone you know. It could potentially save the world. Peace, everybody.
You have been listening to the Pond Hunter Radio broadcast on Blog Talk Radio with your host, Mike Gannon, the Pond Hunter. In the pursuit of all things aquatic, broadcasting Wednesday nights on Blog Talk Radio. The Pond Hunter, keeping it pondy for the aquatically obsessed.
That's right. Keeping it pondy for the aquatically obsessed. Take care, everybody, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Pond Hunter Radio broadcast.